Good evening. Thank you for joining us this hour in the World Tonight. I'm Kelly Wright.
I'm Nayara Huck. We begin this hour marking President Joe Biden's first full year in the Oval Office and what progress he's made for his Black agenda. His Lift Every Voice plan includes access to quality health care, protecting the right to vote, closing the wealth and income gap, ensuring environmental justice, education equity, and justice reform. Black America saw some justice in Biden's first year at the state level. Suspects were held accountable for the deaths of Ahmaud Arbery, Daunte Wright, and George Floyd. The nation's attention returns to Minnesota today, back to the Minneapolis streets where former police officer Derek Chauvin used his knee to choke George Floyd to death in 2020. One down, three to go! One down, three to go! The federal civil rights trial begins in St. Paul against 3 former Minneapolis police officers who watched as George Floyd was murdered. Although Derek Chauvin is serving a 22-and-a-half-year prison sentence, and J. Alexander King, Thomas Lane, and Tao Thao are facing accountability for their alleged complicity in George Floyd's death. Many of the justice reform aspects of President Biden's Lift Every Voice plan for Black America remain unfulfilled, most notably congressional passage of the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act, for which President Biden set a firm deadline of May 2021.
I know Republicans have their own ideas and are engaged in very productive discussions with Democrats in the Senate. We need to work together to find a consensus. But let's get it done next month, by the first anniversary of George Floyd's death.
Whatever happened with the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act? That's a big question. And in the months following Floyd's murder, members of Congress vowed they would pass a bill to reform policing in America.
But the bill never passed because Republicans and some Democrats would not support it. BNC's Dre Clark has more on what President Biden is trying to do to keep the bill alive.
The president still has one last card to play, and he hopes it's a winning one. Many people believed after the heinous murder of George Floyd that it would finally be enough to get meaningful police reform signed into federal law. They were wrong.
You can't stop the revolution! You can't stop the revolution!
When George Floyd's murder went viral, the world took notice. The image of a black man crying and begging for his life as a white police officer crushed his neck led to angry international outrage and protest. A year later, California Congresswoman Karen Bass introduced the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act. The bill would call for banning chokeholds, no-knock warrants, and ending qualified immunity for police officers. Bass was hoping to get bipartisan support. She and Senator Cory Booker worked with Republican Senator Tim Scott to reach a consensus. They negotiated for months. Scott wanted the qualified immunity clause to remain, protecting officers. Ultimately, the bill failed in the Senate, disappointing the president, who also pushed hard to get it through.
We were very supportive of the efforts to negotiate police reform on a bipartisan level. Obviously, that didn't move forward as we would have hoped.
The White House now says the president and his team are working on executive orders.
There's a legal policy substantive process that has to go through in the consideration of executive orders. That's ongoing. It is hard to predict the timing of that, so I don't want to do that from here, but it's a reflection of the president's commitment to delivering on his promise.
But executive orders are not permanent, which is why states like Maryland, Washington, and California passed their own police reform laws within the last year. In California, there is now a system to decertify police officers involved in serious misconduct, like using excessive force, sexual assaults, and demonstrating bias and dishonesty on the job. Also, the state's Attorney General's office must investigate all fatal shootings involving police officers and unarmed civilians. The state's governor signed 8 police reform bills into law, and Assemblywoman Akilah Weber played a crucial part.
Without any accountability, we lose integrity of the badge, and the bond with the community is broken.
In Minneapolis, jury selection is now underway in the federal trial for the 3 other officers charged in connection with the murder of George Floyd. They're being charged for failing to stop Derek Chauvin from killing Floyd and also failing to render aid. The Floyd family says they will be there from start to finish, and they're hoping for guilty convictions. In New York, I'm Dre Clark for BNC.
Joining us now is Hans Manos. He's the Vice President of Triage Response for the Center for Policing Equity and former Executive Director of the Philadelphia Police Advisory Commission. Hans, good to have you back. President Biden's Black Justice Agenda, it includes an overhaul of the federal hate crime law, the same hate crime law being used today in Minneapolis. But it's also a federal law on the expungement of certain criminal records, strengthening restorative justice. Here's how President Biden and Vice President Harris summed up their goals for justice on behalf of Black Americans.
The systemic racism is a stain on our nation's soul. The knee on the neck of justice for Black Americans. Profound fear and trauma, the pain, the exhaustion that Black and brown Americans experience every single day.
Here's the truth about racial injustice. It is not just a Black America problem or a people of color problem. It is a problem for every American. It is keeping us from fulfilling the promise of liberty and justice for all. And it is holding our nation back from realizing our full potential.
Hans, that's the federal perspective, right? An overhauling federal hate crime law. What about state oversight?
Yes, and thank you. Thank you for having me tonight. I think that's the issue that we're seeing across the country. Your segment highlighted a few of these pieces that while federal reform is absolutely necessary and the president and Congress absolutely need to act, what we've seen around the country is that all of the work that has really progressed us in terms of our criminal justice response has been local. Cities like Philadelphia are removing officers from low-level offenses. Our partners in Ithaca, New York, and then St. Louis are really thinking about how we can right-size policing. And we're really looking at this in a state-by-state example where in Austin, Texas, for instance, we're really thinking about a mental health response overall. And so while it's important, we can't lose sight of the fact that all politics are local, and these problems are often solved at the hyper-local level and at the state level, and yes, in the county and city level, just because we can't necessarily rely on the federal government to solve these problems, and they really don't have the reach and the influence to change things where they need to be changed, which is typically at the city and local level.
And Hans, thank you for that. We want to bring in now State's Attorney Aisha Braveboy from Maryland, particularly in Prince George's County, which is a predominantly Black community. State's Attorney, you are someone who's been ahead of the pack, if you will, in terms of dealing with police reform on your level throughout the state of Maryland. What progress have you been able to make in terms of changing the way things have been conducted? And do you see more judicial reforms coming?
Well, first of all, I thank you so much for having me. And I would first start out by answering your second question, is that I think we must always find ways to make our system of justice fairer and better for everyone. So I would say the answer to that last question is absolutely yes. But last year, I had the pleasure of working alongside our state legislature to pass really, I think, just landmark legislation in the country. We got rid of the Law Enforcement Officers Bill of Rights here in Maryland. We also created citizen complaint boards and oversight boards, and also complaint review boards. So those decisions on whether an officer should be charged will be in the hands of the citizens and not just simply police officers. We also focused in on the use of no-knock warrants, and so we limited the use of no-knock warrants. We also limited the times that certain warrants can be executed so that it would make it safer for everyone involved when those warrants have to be executed, but we want it to be executed fairly and safely. We also developed a police training commission that will have one standard of training for all police departments across our state, both county police and also municipal police, as well as our state police. And we also have now a use of force standard that we are developing so that there's also one use of force standard so that when citizens travel throughout the state of Maryland or residents travel throughout out the state of Maryland, there won't be different standards applied to how police can interface and interact with people on the streets.
Hans, what about the federal expungement statute?
So I think what we're looking at here, if we really think about this, is that the president and the federal government have an opportunity here to right a wrong. What we know is that the established science is that Black people, Black communities, Black and brown communities have disproportionately felt the burden of the criminal justice system. To say they've been oppressed would be really a serious understatement. And so if we look backwards, if we fail to look backwards and say, okay, what we really need to do is right some wrongs, to correct the record, to help people get out from under the burden of a criminal record, then we're not doing enough. And so I think understanding that while we need to plan for the future, we have to improve the systems we have. We can't ignore the systems that we had or that we currently have and that we're trying to fix. And it goes a long way when we tell people we recognize that what we've done is wrong. And at the very least, we want to wipe that slate clean, want to help people move on with their lives, even if we can never fully pay back the really decades of oppression that have existed. So, expunging them is one way. There's probably a myriad of other things we can do to drive investment in communities that have been impacted by a lot of the federal laws and the state laws that have created this inequality. But certainly, at the very least, understanding what we can do to help people move on with their lives without the stain of a record is one of the first things we should do. We should probably do a whole lot more.
State's Attorney Braithwaite, you represent Maryland, and as you know, Maryland is a Republican-led state under Governor Larry Hogan. On the federal level, with the president trying to make sure that the George Floyd Police Reform Act was passed in a statement that he made on behalf of the George Floyd family, someone got in the way, Senator Tim Scott. He didn't comply or work with various people on the other side of the aisle, basically because he was against qualified immunity. I'm curious, did he ever reach out to you or to the Republican governor of the state, Larry Hogan, to inquire about the importance of the actions that you took to actually take that off the table to make sure that police reform could happen?
He didn't reach out to me, and I can tell you that that some changes, you're not going to get everything in one bill. And so I think we have to really focus on what is important. I think Hans brought up some really important points, especially around expungement. And even when and I know, though this is not specifically on the topic, I'll come back to that. But even when we look at things like expungement, sometimes we needed an incremental approach, because once you start getting people comfortable with the idea of change and making a system fairer, then you can make additional changes. So with respect to expungement, I was so excited that he mentioned that, because I'm actually pushing this year an expansion of expungement opportunities for Marylanders because there's so many people who've committed very serious crimes, but they did so in their early 20s. Now it's, 30 years later, it's still on their record. It still impacts their ability to get jobs, loans, and everything else. And so it's really important that we focus on restoration, and we believe, like I do, in redemption, that we just have to make those, sometimes they're more incremental steps. But I think when it comes to police reform, we do need to send a strong message. I think if we have 80% of what we want. We can't wait for 100% because it's never going to happen. But that 80% will make a difference in the lives of so many people. And so I think it is just really unfortunate that the federal government has not been able to pass a strong piece of police reform legislation. But the states are stepping up and we're standing in the gap right now, but they can take really our legislation that we passed here at the state level and use that as a model for the federal government, because we did have both Republicans and Democrats who voted for the legislation. So it was bipartisan legislation. And so I'm hopeful that in some ways, states like Maryland can be an example for the country.
And Hans, the state's attorney is talking about a variety of different things that have happened at the local level. Can the federal government, is there actually anything that is happening in the Biden administration for executive orders to take these local examples and make them national simply by, a statement?
Yeah, I think the federal government has proven time and time again that they have many levers that they can pull to create change. When the federal government wanted SROs in schools, they funded that and provided a lot of grants for that to happen. Now we have schools around the country with SROs. When the federal government under the Obama administration said they really want body-worn cameras on the chests of officers around the country, they put their money where their mouth was, and they said, here's the funding to do that. Here's some grants that can make that happen. And now most people in the country can identify with the idea that their officer or officer that they've encountered has a body-worn camera. And that's just the incentives. But there's a lot more they can do through the DOJ to pull levers there in their consent decree process. So the federal government can do a whole lot, including, as you referenced, executive orders. And let's not forget, of course, an act of Congress, which is what we're really after, what we're looking for, what should happen, something that's really sustainable. But yeah, there's so much they can do. And I think what you're referencing on some level is just the bully pulpit, just saying this is really important to the country. This needs to happen. The president, to his credit, has done a bunch of that. But I do think some more concrete examples, literally pulling out an example from Maryland here, an example from Austin or from Philadelphia, and saying we need to see more of these would provide concrete, actionable examples. And of course, providing the funding to support those would really help.
That may turn out to be the
and
theme
what I was
of
also
the
going to
hour
say
in the absence.
I was also going to say,
in the absence of federal engagement and intervention, people like you, state's attorney, Hans, individuals are stepping up in local communities to make these changes happen. Aisha, let me give you the last word in 30 seconds we have left.
Yeah, I was just going to say that the federal government can also incentivize, as Hans mentioned, local states and local jurisdictions to pass progressive legislation around these issues by simply making that a requirement of certain grants that we all want to go after at the federal level. So I think that the federal government can do a lot of different things to incentivize states and localities to do the right thing.
Yeah, and if I may, the federal government, one responsibility there would be to drive the data. And as the data folks in policing, the Center for Police and Equity really needs that to be happening, for folks to be understanding that we need to have data to support our good programs with good arguments and good data. And so another thing the federal government can really require is that we collect and report on data at a national level.
Right. Well, to put a fine point on it, data-driven, bottom-up and top-down strategies. That's our path forward to police reform. Hans Manos, Vice President of Triage Response for the Centering for Police Equity, and Aisha Braveboy, who's the state's attorney for Prince George's County. Thank you both for joining us.
Thanks.
After the break, we're looking at health disparities in America, progress and problems. We'll take a closer look at the roadblocks to equitable health care and why Black Americans are still lagging behind in our country. Welcome back to The World Tonight. The top priority for the Biden administration's first year was fighting the COVID-19 pandemic.
Even boosting the economy took a backseat to that mission because a sick workforce is one that cannot work. The administration's Lift Every Voice plan includes a commitment to improving the health of Black America. But the plan acknowledged at the start that existing disparities in health care were also being revealed and made worse by COVID-19. In April of 2020, as a candidate for president, Biden called on the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention to collect more data regarding how COVID-19 is affecting communities and the role race might play in the pandemic's impact. The data collected so far indicates Black Americans have been dying from COVID-19 at a higher rate than white people. The reasons? Black Americans are more likely to be uninsured, more likely to be exposed to air pollution, and more likely to be frontline workers.
Finding solutions to our healthcare challenges have accelerated during this pandemic, especially in the Black community. Medical problems have been made tougher by the inequitable distribution of resources such as testing and medical equipment. Dr. Yolanda Hancock, public health expert and pediatrician, joins us now to look at progress made in the last year to close the disparity health gap and the most pressing issues President Biden and Congress must still address. Dr. Hancock, I wanted to ask you real quickly to assess this past year under President Biden's leadership. What can you tell us about the nature of disparities as it relates to treating COVID and overcoming COVID between the Black and Brown and Native American communities as compared to the larger community of Americans?
Absolutely. I think the first and most important statistic is to look at life expectancy, because in public health, that is one of the critical measures in determining how healthy a community is. When we look at the impact of 2020 on communities of color, we observe that there are significant decreases simply in life expectancy. The life expectancy of all Americans was reduced last year, or in 2020, by about 1.8 years. But when you look specifically in the Latino population, they lost 3 years of life. Latino men being disproportionately impacted above all other groups of color, they lost 3.7 years of their life. African Americans lost 2.9 years. African American men losing more time than African American women. And so when you think about that, you have to ask yourself, well, what are the components that facilitated this decrease in life expectancy that's only comparable to changes in life expectancy during World War II? So we lost as much life in 2020 as we did during World War II in terms of how long people live. And whenever it rains in this country, it literally is a torrential rain in communities of color. We see those same numbers play out specifically when it comes to COVID-19. As recently as the 15th of January, we see that the Latino community leads the country in terms of the number of people dying from COVID-19 and developing cases. Just behind them, African American and Native American populations. Just yesterday, the per capita rate within the Hispanic population was 435 new cases per 100,000 residents. For African Americans, 253 new cases per 100,000 residents. And in the white community, 192 new cases per 100,000 residents. And what makes it so shocking is when you look at the percentage of people in this country. Whites make up close to 60% of the population in this country. African Americans, a little less than 13%, and the Latino community is pretty comparable. But we represent a disproportionate number of people getting COVID and dying from COVID. And it isn't because of differences necessarily in chronic diseases. Really, it's the social determinants of health, Kelly. It's where communities of color live, where they're born, grow, learn, live, work, and play. And when we look at our pediatric population, our children, we see very similar numbers. Over 55% of children who have been hospitalized due to COVID are Black and Brown. Children who have died, we have now lost over 1,000 children to COVID-19, the majority of them being Black and Brown. Yesterday, we broke a record, 984,000 new cases of COVID-19 among children between January 6th and January 13th. The majority of those children, of nearly 1 million children in just a 1 week's period of time, were children of color. And when you look at the collateral damage in terms of the economic impact, in terms of the educational impact, particularly for our children in the virtual learning space, we were already behind. This pandemic has put us further behind. The Biden administration has certainly taken some steps in addressing these issues. The first was the creation of the COVID-19 Health Equity Task Force. They released a report back in November outlining 5 key areas in which to address these health disparities. And I always find it interesting when people say that COVID-19 revealed them. For those of us who've been doing this work for the past 10, 20 years, we've known that these issues have existed since really the inception of this country. It was created and founded based on health inequities and disparities birthed out of racism. And so what we see coming out of the COVID-19 Health Equity Task Force are excellent recommendations that help address it, but we also need solutions right now.
You unpacked a lot in that. Are you satisfied with the Biden administration's efforts to actually get this message out to Black and brown communities?
And one of the, I certainly commend them for the partnerships that they have established with organizations like the Black Coalition Against COVID, particularly as we began to roll vaccines out. My biggest concern is that it was very limited. We partnered together to push the vaccine out, but where are those same partnerships and conversations as we continue to lag in terms of our vaccination rates? The conversation, the partnership, the efforts have to continue. We can't wait for the information to come from the binder and hit the streets. We have to actively engage right now in terms of the work that we're doing. When you think about recommendations, as an example, that the CDC made to reduce the time that we isolate after having a COVID-19 infection, there are Black and brown people having to show up for work with threat of being fired, even when they are still symptomatic, because the CDC says if you are recovering, you can still show up for work. And so it's the Black and brown folks, 75% of us who cannot telework, that end up showing up and facilitating not only us not being able to recover, but increasing the likelihood of spread, not to mention the responsibility and the burden that some of us have as parents as we're navigating through this pandemic. There's certainly more work to be done, like paid leave. I commend Mayor Bowser in the District of Columbia and the council members there who just yesterday announced a reinstatement of the COVID paid leave. I think that is something that the federal government should consider in terms of all of us being able to be at home, take care of ourselves and our families as we recover through this pandemic.
Appreciate you so much, your keen insight and your perspective and your depth of knowledge. Public health expert and pediatrician Dr. Yolanda Hancock joining us tonight. Thank you for joining us this hour.
Voting rights and the GOP will take a look at what's causing so much Republican stonewalling on the president's effort to protect American democracy. Ahead on The World Tonight.
We're back to The World Tonight. Former President Donald Trump facing legal troubles in Georgia. A district attorney in Georgia wants a grand jury to investigate the former president's alleged election interference. District Attorney Fannie Willis says her office has information of possible criminal disruption in the state's 2020 election. A special grand jury would have the power to subpoena reluctant witnesses. In order to seat a grand jury, the majority of the Fulton County's Superior Court judges have to approve the request.
This type of behavior is why voting rights must be protected at the federal level. Ensuring election integrity was part of President Joe Biden's voting rights promise to Black America.
1 year into his presidency, he's one part of the Biden administration's Lift Every Voice plan that has been silenced, not only by the Republican opposition, but members of his own party. The plan issues challenges for Congress to pass the Voting Rights Advancement Act and ensure election security. But as we've seen this season in the Senate, voting rights have reached a stalemate despite a narrow Democratic majority.
So if voting rights has dead and a rival, will Biden's plan ever get lifted? DNC's White House correspondent Ariana Manise is live from Capitol Hill with the details. Ariana?
Nayara, Democrats are trying to find a path forward after another failed attempt to pass voting rights. They find themselves down a legislative route that always leads to defeat, presenting another setback for President Biden's agenda as he marks 1 year in the White House. Democrats, they're now forced to pivot to bipartisan talks to reform the nation's electoral process.
This vote, the yeas are 49, the nays are 51. 3/5 of the senators duly chosen and sworn not having voted in the affirmative. The motion is not agreed to.
Legislation to protect voting rights is stalled for the foreseeable future following a fifth failed attempt by Senate Democrats to pass the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act
Do the people want a compromise?
and the Freedom to Vote Act. As expected, Senators Manchin and Sinema voted against their party's efforts to allow a talking filibuster.
Isn't protecting voting rights and preventing their diminution more important than a rule in the Senate?
Republicans once again demonstrated they're not willing to support comprehensive voting reform.
People like us, racist, traitors.
Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell is now facing criticism for comments he made on the issue.
Well, the concern is misplaced because if you look at the statistics, African-American voters are voting in just as high a percentage as Americans. A recent survey, 94% of Americans thought it was easy to vote. This is not a problem.
Congressional Democrats are now considering an alternative yet narrow path to reform federal elections.
So I'm hopeful that we will clarify this issue. I'm hopeful that we will be successful in this effort to preclude the politicians from substituting their judgment for the judgment of the people.
A growing group of Republicans and Democrats have expressed openness to overhaul the Electoral Count Act.
Just like any bill out there, in every Congress we look, it's an old piece of law, so you can always modernize it.
At this point, reforming the vote counting process seems to be Democrats' only option as they continue to voice their commitment to protecting voting rights in the name of the late Representative John Lewis.
John never gave up. John could be jailed. John could be beaten. John could be rejected. John didn't give up. We can't give up. Central to America's democracy is the ability of everyone to vote.
Now, also happening on Capitol Hill, Democratic Representative Jamal Bowman, he was arrested today as he was participating in a voting rights protest. We reached out to his office and they tell me that he has since been released and he will continue to fight to amplify the need to protect our democracy. Back to you.
Ariana, we thank you for that report. Now, it wasn't always this divided. In July of 2006, senators voted 98-0 to renew key parts of the 1965 Voting Rights Act. Back then, Senator Mitch McConnell supported that vote, calling it a good piece of legislation, which is vastly different to what he's saying now and his party members' words on the Senate floor Wednesday.
But today, the president and his party will try to use fear and panic to smash the Senate, silence millions of Americans, and seize control of our democracy.
Mitch McConnell isn't the only Republican senator whose anti-voting rights stance is curious. As Reverend Dr. William Barber II pointed out in this tweet, South Carolina Senator Tim Scott said he'd support President Trump, while former Trump staff were actually trying to stop him. We have said a lot about Manchin and Sinema, but we need to call out Scott, a Southern black man who benefited from the Voting Rights Act and the fight for voting rights.
Here to talk about Republican allyship, or the lack thereof, is Teslyn Figaro. She's a BNC political contributor and host of Straight Shot No Chaser podcast. Teslyn, I got to ask you about this sound that's been going around about Senator Mitch McConnell, because he didn't stop with just what he said on the floor yesterday. He continued on in a press conference to say that African Americans vote in greater numbers than Americans. What do you make of that statement?
I make of it as it is what it is. But even past the statement, let's look at his actions. His actions line up with seeing Black Americans as not having the same access or having the same equal as what he calls Americans, what he really means is white Americans. So whether it was a slip of the tongue, whether it was a fumble in his words, the bottom line is we can look at his actions and like they always say, actions speak louder than words.
Teslyn, many people see this as being akin to the hypocrisy of democracy. How do you see this whole thing playing out over voting rights?
Well, what I see is yet another failed promise that was made by this administration and furthers voter depression. This morning, we were talking about Joe Biden's speech, particularly what he said to Black people, which is, oh, you know, COVID has stopped me from being able to look people in the eyes. And I deeply disagree with that, Kelly, because COVID did not stop campaigning. It did not stop making promises. And we all know that the idea is to under promise and over deliver. And so Joe Biden has yet to still put the pressure on Joe Manchin to keep talking about what Republicans are not doing, begging them, let's call out Tim Scott. They have dug their heels in. They have told you what it is. They're not moving forward. This is about the Democrat Party getting all of their players in line and ending the filibuster. And yesterday, the very moment that Joe Biden was giving a pathetic speech, Joe Manchin was in Congress killing every agenda that he had, literally at the same time. And meanwhile, Joe Madison was at home starving to death, begging for voting rights to be passed. Something is wrong with that picture. And so until there is a consequence for the team players that are allegedly on the team, Manchin and Sinema, more of this will continue. I have no problem calling out Republicans. But what I know is, and what my Air Force training says is, you don't go beg the enemy, those who have already said they're against you. The question is cleaning up your own house and figuring out why is it that your own members are against you. Last year, the play was, we got to vote, we got to vote. Now people voted in large numbers, and next time in 2022, oh, we got to vote to save voting rights. Kelly, it's going to be very hard for those on the ground that are trying to get people organized, at least on the federal side. I still believe, however, in local and state elections, particularly those that are nonpartisan, like you mentioned in our last segment on those school board positions.
Mm-hmm. Teslin, shouldn't Senator Tim Scott be considered one of our own as a person of color?
No, because everybody that looks like me is not for me. So Tim Scott is Tim Scott. Based on Tim Scott's record, he is a conservative. He operates like a conservative. He was elected by conservatives. He moves like a conservative. There are Black conservatives. I know that's hard to believe, but there are Black conservatives, and he is one, and he is operating like one. And so what is the confusion about it? He also didn't bring forward and have any type of working with them on the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. So I expect him to be who he was. In fact, Manchin was who he was. Manchin has said this entire time, all year long, this is what I'm going to do. He told Chuck Schumer to his face. He told Joe Biden to his face. Democrats are the only ones that are going to Capitol Hill singing songs saying, I'm not going to let Sinema turn me around. Well, they turned you around. They shut you down. They told you to have several seats, and they've said what it was. So all I want to know is, what is the consequences? Will Joe Biden remove Manchin from committee seats? Oh, no, they won't do that either, because they'll say, oh, no, he'll leave and he'll become a Republican. Guess what the breaking news is, Kelly? He's already a Republican. What more can they lose at this point if he is already killing everything that they want to do?
Teslin Figueroa, she doesn't pull any punches, BNC political contributor. We thank you as always. You're also the host of Straight Shot, No Chaser podcast. And again, always good to hear your perspective. Thanks for joining us this hour.
1 year later, how do we stack up on the world stage? Is it still America first? We'll go from Haiti to Russia next on The World Tonight. President Biden made commitments not just to Americans, but to the global community, promising the world a United States that works with allies, makes foreign policy more humane, and champions democracy.
So is the message I want the world to hear today. America is back. America is back. Diplomacy is back at the center of our foreign policy. We will repair our alliances and engage with the world once again, not to meet yesterday's challenges, but today's and tomorrow's.
Joining us now to dig into how the Commander-in-Chief delivered on the world stage is Nola Haynes with Women of Color Advancing Peace and Security. She's also one of Diversity and National Security's Power 50. Nola, welcome back. President Biden did what many other presidents promised but couldn't deliver He ended the forever war in Afghanistan. But did he actually end up delivering what the American public really wanted?
Thank you so much for having me back on the show. I always enjoy talking to you, especially about foreign affairs. In terms of promises kept, the campaign promise was kept that we would get out of Afghanistan, right? What happened when we pulled out is more of the concern. So in one regard, there is a campaign promise that said that we would get out of Afghanistan, and that did happen. However, the optics, the humanitarian crisis left behind, and the fact that we disappointed our allies in terms of where we stand in the world, considering the very hectic administration, the hectic Trump administration, our trust, our allies are looking at us a little side-eye. They're wondering what is happening, what is going on. So Afghanistan was an opportunity, like President Biden just said in that earlier clip, to say that we are back. But I don't think we showed the world that we were back. I think because of promises kept in the former administration, we had to pull out the way that we did. It's a very complicated situation. However, we did disappoint our allies, and there is a huge humanitarian crisis left behind. And I have a level of expertise on this because I work in an Afghan resettlement space. And I can tell you that is an active situation, and they need a lot of help. We still have allies depending on us, and we need to keep our promises to them.
Mm-hmm. Take a listen to how President Biden framed broadly his foreign policy approach. In democracy and autocracy, he talked about this as like this is the moment for democracies. But we're waiting literally right now for an imminent Russian invasion of Ukraine. So what does this moment mean for Biden's defense of democracy?
It's a very active situation. Secretary Blinken is in Germany. He's going to have more meetings through the rest of the week. It is a very live and active situation. What does that mean for democracy? Well, what it means is that we have to respect Ukraine's sovereignty first and foremost. And I think that that's a very important point because we tend to talk about Ukraine in terms of what is the U.S. going to do? Well, we can't do anything without Ukraine. So one of the challenges that we face in terms of Ukraine, in terms of making sure that democratic backsliding isn't happening any more than it is. I mean, including our own country. We are actually at risk of losing our own democracy. We landed on a democratic backsliding list. So we are going around the world saying democracy is the way to go. However, at the same time, we are at the center of the conversation with Russia and Ukraine, which to me is a little problematic because Ukraine is a sovereign nation, although Russia, part of the aggression is Russia doesn't think so. Russia doesn't think that any of the states that left the USSR are sovereign states. And that's part of the problem. So in terms of democracy, first and foremost, we need to respect Ukraine as a democratic state, a sovereign state. And the conversation needs to always include Ukraine.
Well, and that is going to be the challenge because the Ukraine has blatantly asked for the United States to intervene and help it out. But before I let you go, I want to do a real quick in the minute we have left together. Title 42 restrictions remain in Mexico. Both of these are Trump-era immigration policies still in place. So has the Biden administration any different? Has it been a more humane administration on immigration?
There is one exemption. There's one exemption in terms of unaccompanied minors. That is the one exemption to the Trump era Title 42 policy. That is really a public health policy that wasn't meant to be used and weaponized in the way in which it is. Now, looking ahead right now in the Biden administration, although there's exemption for unaccompanied minors, people are still being refused asylum at the borders, and it's people that are brown folks, mostly Haitians. And this country has a very long history of not doing right by Haitians. We can go all the way back to 1996 in the Clinton administration, when a lot of folks from places in Latin America and Central America were welcomed into this country due to civil wars. Haitians were not. So what is our deal with Haitians? Is it because they have black skin? They have darker skin? What is the deal with Haitians? So Unfortunately, with Title 42, the issue still persists that people are not getting their due process. They're not able to seek asylum. But unfortunately, a lot of Haitians are caught up in this dragnet, and they are being dropped off in places in Mexico and other places where they don't speak the language. They don't have their luggage. They don't have their documents. They're just being dropped off in places. That is a problem. It is a huge problem. And again, as we talk a lot about, Naira, it's about trust. It's about how we're looking on the global stage. For us to go around the world and to talk about democracy, to talk about diversity, we must be invested in it, and we need to show up.
Nola Haynes, Women of Color Advancing Peace and Security and Diversity National Security's Power 50. Thank you for your insights tonight. Still ahead at the top of the hour, we're taking a deep dive into the Biden agenda, 1 year into his presidency.
We're going to continue to look at the various things going on, like the racial wealth gap, and see if he can get that piece of his promise kept.
The African-American community stood up again for me. You've always had my back, and I'll have yours.
There's been a lot of progress made. We need to build on that. The work is not done. The job is not done. And we are certainly not conveying it is.
No matter how hard they make it for minorities to vote, I think you're going to see them willing to stand in line and defy the attempt to keep them from being able to vote.
We do not need to hear any more performative speeches about how important we are. What we need right now is for Joe Biden to actually do something to make black people's lives better.
That is my own making by not communicating as much as I should have. Yet, I didn't overpromise, but I think if you take a look at what we've been able to do, you'd have to acknowledge we made enormous progress. It's just going to take a little bit of time.
Thank you for joining us for the second hour of The World Tonight. I'm Naira Huck.
And I'm Kelly Wright. We begin this hour with the Biden administration 1 year in. Is President Biden keeping his promises to Black America? The Biden administration's Black Agenda, Lift Every Voice, features 6 areas of focus ranging from justice reform to education equality to fix long-standing systemic issues that have led to racial inequalities between white and Black America. So here we are 1 year later, and we're doing a deep dive into the administration. And has the Biden agenda brought about progress?
Or are we worse off than we were on this day 1 year ago? Here's BNC's Del Walters to tell us how we got to where we are today.
The Biden administration began with an insurrection wrapped inside a pandemic, the aftermath of an embarrassing moment in history, a U.S. president twice impeached. The chaos, followed by the promise of calm.
We can't play into the hands of these people. We have to have peace.
But that calm was surrounded by razor wire and 5,000 members of the National Guard, all there to protect a fragile peace that began day one of the Biden administration. The only bright spot, an African-American poet in a canary yellow coat.
The loss we carry a sea we must wade. We've braved the belly of the beast. We've learned that quiet isn't always peace.
There was a honeymoon, albeit brief. Congress passed a massive rescue plan to keep Americans safe as they waited for a vaccine. Checks began flooding American bank accounts. Bipartisan infrastructure bill was passed. Republicans and Democrats working together. The promise of the Biden administration coming into full view. On July 4th, the Biden administration felt confident enough to declare America was back.
Today, all across this nation, we can say with confidence, America is coming back together.
But in the end, the virus was going to have the last say. First, Delta and the death of high-profile victims like former Secretary of State Colin Powell.
This variant, as you know, is every day getting more and more dominant.
Then Omicron. One by one, some of the strongest voices against the administration policies of masking and vaccines fell silent. Radio host, televangelist.
Early data suggests that Omicron is more transmissible than Delta, with a doubling time of about 2 days.
COVID fatigue led to voter outrage. Ground zero, school and election boards nationwide. People who once described their lives as boring now found themselves having to hire private security. In November of 2021, seat change. Republican Glenn Youngkin took over the State House in solid blue Virginia.
All righty, Virginia, we won this thing!
A series of Democratic self-inflicted wounds quickly followed. The death knell for Build Back Better came at the hands of two Democratic senators, Kyrsten Sinema and Joe Manchin.
I don't tend to do anything that divides our country anymore. So whatever I can do to unite and bring people together, and that means you have to work harder as you work across the aisle to bring people together.
By Thanksgiving, Americans were free to fly, but with one major caveat. The virus was surging in numbers never before seen. By December, the setbacks seemed to outweigh the accomplishments. Supply chain issues threatened Santa. Inflation threatened American households. No criminal justice reform, no Build Back Better. The last domino to fall, voting rights.
I've been having these quiet conversations with the members of Congress for the last 2 months. I'm tired of being quiet.
To add insult to injury, as Biden made his way to Capitol Hill to make one last push for voting rights, Kyrsten Sinema, a fellow Democrat, took to the Senate floor to say it was all for naught.
And while I continue to support these bills, I will not support separate actions that worsen the underlying disease of division infecting our country.
And so, as we mark year one of the Biden administration, the loudest voices are those of his fellow Democrats and black voters who feel betrayed. The other voices speaking loudly, the January 6th committee investigating that insurrection that began it all. Seditious conspiracy charges being filed against 10 of those who stormed the Capitol and one Oath Keeper who stood back. The most outspoken voice, a Republican, Liz Cheney.
This investigation must go forward. The idea that anybody would be playing politics with an attack on the United States Capitol is despicable and is disgraceful.
Through it all, the only constant, a pandemic, which more than anything else seems to control the Biden fates and fortunes. I'm Del Walters.
And Del, we thank you for that report. Now, a major area of focus for the Biden administration's promise to Black America is bridging the racial wealth gap. That's outlined in his Lift Every Voice plan. It includes the following initiatives: increasing investment in black businesses, expanding black home ownership, ensuring equal access to credit and capital holding companies accountable for pay inequity, and adding financial support to rural communities.
Here to discuss with us ways the Biden administration can help bridge the racial wealth gap is Juliana Njoku, founder of the Workforce Strong in Atlanta. Juliana, good of you to join us tonight. The economic piece of Lift Every Voices focuses heavily on home ownership and business ownership. Why is that such an important part of bridging the racial wealth gap?
First of all, thank you so much for having me back on your show. You guys do an excellent job of reporting and keeping the community well informed. Home ownership is one of the pivotal linchpins for wealth building. The average white household has had the gift of being able to pass on home ownership, which has allowed intergenerational wealth to be able to move along smoothly and to also gain. The African American community has never really had full access due to redlining and other systematic loans, systematic issues that have plagued the community. Without home ownership, without direct investments, without education, without those systematic advancements to ensure that the dollar that you earn multiplies and grows in equity, it's almost near impossible for you to meet the maximum, what you can meet as a maximum goal for true wealth building in the Black community.
And Juliana, on day one, when he launched his presidency, he signed an executive order to put these plans into place about bridging the racial gap. Yet, it would appear now, it seems like a big gap. Approximately 4% of small business owners are African American, even though Black people make up 13% of the population. What's behind that, and what can the president do to alleviate that?
Unfortunately, most of the dollars and the enthusiasm that the president put forth has been politicized. The dollars that are leaving the federal government, heading to the state, meant to go to the local communities, are wrought with political agendas and are also stalemated by access to information. There's also another gap in process. Most people simply do not know how to access significant amount of funding, even with the Biden administration's clear intentions. And without having access to those fundings, there's no way to make those direct investments for those agenda points to actually be fulfilled. Most of the time, we're not ever talking about the fact of the state of the country before even the pandemic, when the gap in the African American community was a $24,000 household for a Black community versus a $188,000 household for the white community. Mm-hmm. And when you look at Black businesses, most of the Black businesses were smaller operations in need of structural and resource fundings from the beginning. And then the pandemic hit, and then their slow access to get funding, lost revenue, and lack of full savings. All of these things compiled a lot of things that happen with small businesses. Now, most people are scared. The pandemic is slowing down, but it's not a halt. And most people are concerned about what the next variant might mean for them in the midst of now a gubernatorial race for many states, in the midst of the politicization of simple things as voter rights. It's hard for people to see the way forward, and it's hard for people to understand how they're supposed to get what they need, what they paid into in taxes in order for them to build back.
Home ownership, though, is so low, actually lower than it was when the 1968 Fair Housing Act passed. This current generation, millennials, right, having a hard time affording homes, the types of homes that their parents with working class jobs were able to actually, participate in that part of the economy. So what happened? Why did it widen so much, even though we had those laws from 50 years ago?
Well, there is significant research talking about what happened with our skills gap, and what happened in our investment in our workforce, and what happened in the United States in investment in business and industries that would have met the next generation for them to keep up with the wealth that was growing in our grandfathers' generations. Now, topple with that a health crisis mixed with the fact that most people couldn't even afford rent. And therefore, you have student loan issues. Then you add in credit issues. There was a multi-layered effect of borrowing against what you did not have and what you cannot earn. And when you mix that all together, it's hard for people to even imagine the dream of home ownership when you are still trying to pay back for your education, you're still trying to build up from what you borrowed with your credit. And you know that these two things are direct aspects of even getting a loan. And I'm not going to talk about predatory lending and all that's happening, that happened with young adults, African Americans, having to do with being able to have access to loans and products and loan products that they could actually truly afford, utilize along the way. So it's a multi-layered effect, and the Biden administration is trying to untangle something that it's deeply locked in together. One thing affects another thing, which ultimately affects the final product, which is access to wealth, which is growth and equity in our country.
Amazing conversation with you right there about the domino effect of a lot of bad policies in the past, and it's just hard to do in 1 year to undo all of that. Juliana Njoku, founder of Workforce Strong, and I can see why you're developing a lot of great workforce there in Atlanta. Great conversation. Thank you for joining us this hour to talk about the racial wealth gap.
Up next on The World Tonight, we look at President Biden's first year and focus on the plan for Black America when it comes to climate change. One of the things President Biden campaigned on was advancing environmental justice by investing in clean energy projects and going after companies that cause harm in low-income communities, polluting the air, land, and water. The Biden plan for environmental justice calls for reinstating federal protections, holding polluters accountable, and ensuring access to safe drinking water. Here's what President Biden said yesterday on the likelihood of this part of his Build Back Better plan having to be broken up to pass.
It's clear to me that we're going to have to probably break it up. I think that we can get, and I've been talking to a number of my colleagues on the Hill, I think it's clear that we would be able to get support for the $500+ billion for energy and the environmental issues that are there.
Joining me now to talk about climate change and how marginalized communities are often exposed to weather extremes is Bernadette Woods-Plackey. She's the Chief Meteorologist and Climate Matters Director. Bernadette, good to have you with us tonight. The Build Back Better plan, so much hope put into there for addressing our climate crisis. So with the president saying that portion of the plan can be divvied up, is there still hope for dealing with environmental justice?
Well, there's definitely still the hope, and we've got to keep the hope. One of the things that's really interesting is there's the bill itself, but there's also how Biden has brought this into a lot of different layers of government and inserting in an all-of-government approach the equity factor. And it's really critical because there's so many issues that we're dealing with in the world. One of the biggest ones is climate change, because all of the issues that are in full display, we were just talking about, everything from health to our economy to our housing, all of that is worsened with our changing climate. And that's why it's so critical that we address this issue as quickly as we can. And we really need to bring in the equity angle to it.
Mm-hmm. Communities of color suffer on both ends of the spectrum, right? There's the preparing for climate change and adapting to it. And when you have crises like flooding in urban areas, we've had that in New York, New Jersey, the Flint water crisis still not resolved. Communities don't have, on the other end, the ability to recover either. So what is it? Is it a city solution? And what is the solution then to making sure that Black and brown communities can weather these storms?
Well, I wish it was just one simple answer because then it would be easier to fix. But there's a lot of layers to this, and we'll get into a couple of those quickly. The first is that all of the things that were just discussed in your last segment apply here too. This is a really intertwined problem with so many different layers to it. And we need to bring the right voices into the conversation. And that's a big thing that's being pushed right now with this current administration. You need the people being affected most by these extremes to be part of the conversation and the solutions going forward. So that's one of the big things that is happening. The second thing too is access, as was just discussed, access to the ability to be able to prepare, the ability to be able to get the information and the watches and warnings, access to the recovery issues. And we're talking about this for a wide range of racial impacts here too. The language barrier comes into play here too, sometimes with just the warnings of different storms coming, and then how to get access to the information to recover at the other end of this. So that's another layer. The third piece, and again, we could go on for so many different layers of how intertwined this is when you already come in to every one of these conversations without that buffer of being able to absorb an extreme event. It makes it harder to prepare. It makes it harder to recover. Let's take a hurricane, for example. It is harder to evacuate when you don't have the resources, or when you can't just work from home, or when you have to move multi-layers of your family with you. So that's one piece of this. And then when you do recover, you may not have the resources to front the money before you get it from FEMA or from wherever it's coming from. So there are so many different layers to this conversation of how we need to bring the right voices into the conversation, because quite honestly, those who have been impacted the most are the most resilient, and they have the most to offer to this conversation.
We're certainly, I think, as a community, better understanding now how climate change is not just about the weather, right? All the layers that you just explained are connected. Let's connect the one about health disparities, though, right? Air pollution. We're now in a respiratory virus pandemic. What has that done this last year?
I'm going to hit on two pieces here with health. There are a lot of parts to it, but the two biggest pieces where we're seeing the biggest inequities are air quality and heat. And in air quality, it comes from not just what we're talking about with greenhouse gases in our atmosphere, but pollution coming from our cars directly putting that into our air. And then when that combines with more heat, you are seeing this noxious sort of explosion of combination of our air quality that is worsening asthma cases. And for those who are marginalized in COVID situations anyway, it's pushing those to the levels where they may get hospitalized or they may have more to deal with that they wouldn't have had to before. The other thing with air quality is the more heat we have in our system, it leads to worsening air quality days. And what we're seeing in a lot of communities is that those that don't have the resources to fight the battle quite the same way or are marginalized live closer to the pollution. And so that all leads to worsening air quality. And that is one of our biggest challenges as a society. Now, heat, this is a whole different part of the conversation too. What we see when we talk about redlining communities, you could almost directly overlay from city to city to city the redlining with where we see tree cover. And tree cover gives us shade. And it also sucks up some of that heat in different ways, and it cleans our air too. And so one of the biggest things we're seeing, and it's so simplistic, is no trees in parts of cities. And that leads to 5 to 10 degrees warmer on a hot day. And that stresses our energy systems. And that stresses multi-family homes that have the older people and the younger people that are really compacted into the same building. And so all of that adds up to this point that we're seeing heat and air quality being two huge impacts of climate change.
Well, I'm thinking of the heat and the crisis we saw happen in the Bronx, right, which encapsulates, no one really talked about it in terms of a climate problem, but you had people who didn't have access to heat in extreme cold using a fire heater, like a local a small heater, and it led to a fire killing a dozen plus people. So at a very micro level, what can somebody living in tight quarters in an urban center really do to fix their situation?
The big picture is we need to get a handle on climate change, but that's a big one, and that's a big one to tackle. And I know that, and we need a lot more time to get into that, but that is the biggest thing that we do need to do. In the interim, we have to learn to deal with the situations that are in place. And there are a lot of adaptation methods for that. Some of that talking about when we talk about urban heat islands, getting more trees, more healthy trees in place is something we can do. Cooling roofs, cooling centers, access to this, being able to distribute that information so people can get to them when they need to. These are things that we can do right now while we're tackling the bigger problem.
And that's what it comes down to. This is not something that's going to be an individual solution. It has to be a systemic effort at multiple layers of government. Bernadette Woods-Plackey, Chief Meteorologist and Climate Matters Director, thank you for your insights tonight.
The future of America is bright and black. Why fixing the student debt crisis is urgent, as well as disparities in access to a high-quality education. We're looking at solutions for President Biden and Congress when The World Tonight continues. You're watching BNC.
Breaking news. Jury selection is complete in the federal trial of the 3 former Minneapolis police officers charged in the murder of George Floyd. Opening statements are set to begin on Monday. No black jurors were seated today. Of the 10 women and 8 men chosen, 2 are reportedly of Asian descent. The rest are white. The officers are charged with violating Floyd's civil rights while acting as government officials. Fellow officer Derek Chauvin was convicted last year on state murder charges and plans to plead guilty in his upcoming federal civil rights proceedings.
And it's been 1 year since President Biden has been in office, and yes, there has been progress, I should say, but many Black Americans want to know when his promises will be fully realized.
A major part of his agenda for Black America, education equity. That includes funding underserved school districts, investing in HBCUs, and addressing the student debt crisis.
We're going to cut student loan payments in half by using those income-based payments. You know, if you're making $25,000 or less per year, you won't owe a dime of payment or interest while you're only at that level. If you make more than that, you only pay a small percentage of your income in order to be able to pay off your debt. Our legislative plan also means that if you choose to go into public service, whether you're a teacher, a paramedic, counseling victims of domestic violence, or whatever else, it's only right that our country wipe out your student debt altogether over time. It includes forgiving debt for undergraduate public tuition if you're earning less than $125,000 a year. It means immediately forgiving $10,000 in student debt.
Well, that forgiveness is on ice after the $10,000 cut was gutted from President Biden's Build Back Better plan as part of the compromise to get Senate Democrat holdouts on board. Now, this largely impacts people of color who typically borrow more for college while also holding less wealth than their white counterparts, the same people of color who helped elect President Biden.
Roosevelt Institute found that cancellation would have the greatest impact on poor Black households. The poorest 10% of Black homes would have more than $17,000 of debt canceled. In contrast, the wealthiest 10% of households would only see about $500 canceled. Joining us now is Dr. Ali Bustamante. He's the Deputy Director of Roosevelt Institute's Education, Jobs, and Worker Power Program, and Dr. Maria Lumpkin, former interim president of an HBCU. They join us this hour to talk about this important matter. Dr. Ali, I'll begin with you. Census data says the future of America is Black and brown, and we're seeing that happening, the browning of America. So quality education is paramount. Is student loan forgiveness the best place to start, or funding institutions that fund minority communities?
There's absolutely no need to choose one or the other. In fact, what we know is that President Biden does have the power to forgive and cancel student loans, as you mentioned, which disproportionately impact the Black and brown communities. Furthermore, it's really when we're looking at the Build Back Better Act where we see the potential of really having a game-changing policy for centering equity in both higher ed and in the broader economy. One part of the plan that shouldn't be forgotten is a $10 billion investment in HBCUs and minority-serving institutions that is right now being held by the Senate.
Dr. Maria, is what we're seeing the result of a failure of affirmative action efforts in education?
Well, first of all, the current higher education financing regimen sediments and exacerbates inequality. And student loans adversely affect, as you mentioned, Black and white racial wealth gaps. The very thing that is supposed to liberate us now enslaves us. And so, yes, there is a serious dilemma that we have with the rising student loan debt. It's one of the more painful aftershocks, not only of affirmative action, but the Great Recession. Millions of Americans during that period of time lost their jobs and homes, while others lost much of their household wealth. And this decrease in household wealth has continued to put a strain on the ways families pay for higher education expenses, often shifting the burden of paying for college from the family to the student. And we are seeing the results of that now, particularly at historically Black colleges and universities, where the majority of our students are first-generation college students that come to the shores of our campus as if it were an Ellis Island, a place of liberation And it is, because education is supposed to be the great equalizer. But I think that the larger issue that we are contending with is educational equity. And educational equity means that every child, every student receives what they need to develop into their fullest academic and social potential.
Well, I mean, Dr. Maria, what you said is very profound, particularly when you stated what is meant to liberate us is enslaving us. Dr. Ali, based on what we've just heard, if we can't get this done through a Build Back Better program because of Congress acting willy-nilly and not getting anything done, would the president be better off initiating an executive order on this important issue?
You know, student debt cancellation is something within President Biden's power. And as we've been talking, it's really a policy that would disproportionately benefit Black and brown borrowers. When we're looking at particularly those who borrow the most, 75% of HBCU students rely on Pell Grants, which are need-based. And it's something like Build Back Better that has the potential of growing Pell Grants. However, with the Senate not passing that Build Back Better Act, it's really up to the president to use what powers he has at his disposal, such as canceling student debt.
All right, so let's say tomorrow President Biden gets his wish. Congress moves on education equity. Dr. Maria, why don't you tell us on this one? How long before progress will actually impact college students and college graduates?
Well, if this can be moved through quickly, it can be really an expeditious impact on college students and students that have been impacted adversely by student loan debt. This is a very propitious moment in the life of our nation's historically Black colleges and universities. We are seeing some increases in enrollment and for some institution retention. And many students are attracted to the enduring mission of our institutions. But with the movement of releasing students from student loan debt, that has an immediate impact. This means that our institutions, and I'm speaking of historically Black colleges and universities, facilities issues can be addressed. Technology infrastructure can be addressed. To enable better teaching and learning opportunities for the 21st century. Normative high-impact practices can be deployed, and students will have more resources to be able to do that. And we can see the immediate impact that it will have on households. Education, I do believe, still is the anchoring and foundational piece of what enables communities of color to thrive and to be able to attain the American dream or the ideal of the American dream, and ensuring that we are able to eliminate the burden of student loan debt. Again, there's an immediate impact that will have on communities of color.
Yeah, an immediate impact indeed, not to mention it would take a lot of pressure off the young students who are getting that student loan forgiveness. But Dr. Ali, it can't just be student loan forgiveness. What other policy needs to be attached to this to really make a difference, a significant impact, to actually build a better future, build it back better?
Absolutely. We suffered, a really tough year now coming on to 2 years with the COVID-19 pandemic, as well as economic crisis, social crisis, all of which have hit Black communities the hardest. And so really a big part of moving forward, and as you mentioned, building forward better, ultimately requires that we have a growing economy that is really inclusive and that shares prosperity broadly. Now, the president has made a commitment to full employment, and we have seen growth in jobs as well as reductions in the unemployment rate, all of which have disproportionately benefited the Black and brown community. However, when we look at moving forward, it's really something of the scale of the Build Back Better Act and the continuation of existing policies that help strengthen our economy and center equity as we think of the investments needed to shore up HBCUs in this critical time.
Very great conversation with both of you. I'm so delighted you could join us. Dr. Ali Bustamante, Deputy Director of Roosevelt Institute's Education, Jobs, and Worker Power Program, and Dr. Maria Lumpkin, former interim president of an HBCU. Again, thank you for joining us. After the break, we'll continue our look at the Biden-Harris administration 1 year since taking office.
Ahead, our reflections. You're watching The World Tonight. Stay right here. A devastating loss today for the members of the Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. Cheryl Hickman, national president of the historic and influential sorority, passed away this morning after battling a recent illness. Hickman was appointed national president during the sorority's 55th National Convention in last November in Atlanta. Hickman's passing marks the first time the sorority has lost a president in office. And thank you all for joining The World Tonight. I'm Nayara Huck.
And I'm Kelly Wright. Amplified with Aisha Mills is next. We leave you tonight with this reflection of 1 year for Black America under the Biden administration. We've come so far, but we've still got so far to go. Good night, everyone.
I, Kamala Davy Harris, do solemnly swear
that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States.
that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States.
We will not march back to what was, but move to what shall be.
Looks like y'all ready to make history. Looks like you're ready to transform America.
This was not a riot. This was a massacre, among the worst in our history, but not the only one. And for too long, forgotten by our history.
To have it actually happen was, can I use the phrase the children use? It was off the chain. None of us are free until we're all free. And we're not free yet.
Liberty, let our rejoicing rise. Let it resound loud as the rolling sea. Sing a song full of the faith that the dark past has taught us. Sing a song full of the hope that the present has brought. Facing the rising sun of a new day begun, let us march on to victory. Is one.
I didn't overpromise, but I think if you take a look at what we've been able to do, you'd have to acknowledge we made enormous progress. It's just going to take a little bit of time.